The day my neighbor threatened to report me for feeding squirrels was the day she accidentally started one of the strangest neighborhood stories anyone had ever seen. At first I thought she was joking. After all, I was not causing noise, damaging property, or bothering anyone. I simply enjoyed sitting in my backyard with a cup of coffee while a few squirrels visited for peanuts and seeds. But she was completely serious. She marched across the street, pointed at the squirrels in my yard, informed me that they were becoming a problem because I kept feeding them. What happened next turned a simple complaint into something the entire neighborhood would end up talking about for months. Before we get into the story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Karen Stories Daily if you enjoy neighborhood drama, Karen encounters, and unbelievable real-life stories. This one starts with a complaint about squirrels and ends with something nobody saw coming. I have always liked animals. Nothing extreme. I do not run a wildlife rescue or anything like that. I simply enjoy watching birds, squirrels, and other small animals that pass through the neighborhood. When I moved into the area several years ago, I noticed there were plenty of squirrels living in the large trees behind my house. Every morning a few would wander through the yard searching for food. Eventually they became comfortable enough to approach while I sat outside. I started leaving small amounts of squirrel, safe food in a corner of the yard. Nothing excessive, just enough to enjoy watching them for a few minutes each day. For nearly 2 years nobody complained. Most neighbors thought it was entertaining. Kids especially loved seeing the squirrels running around. Then a new neighbor moved into the house directly across from me. Her name was Linda, although before long most people quietly referred to her as the neighborhood Karen. At first she seemed friendly enough. She smiled during introductions. She attended community events. She waved while walking her dog. But over time people started noticing a pattern. Linda always seemed to be looking for something to complain about. One week it was garbage cans left out too long. The next week it was decorations. Then it was parked cars. Then it was lawn maintenance. Nothing ever seemed good enough. Eventually her attention shifted toward my yard. One afternoon she walked across the street while I was sitting outside. Without even saying hello, she pointed toward a squirrel sitting near a tree and asked if I was feeding them. I told her yes. She immediately frowned. Then she launched into a speech about how squirrels were pests and how people should not encourage them. I listened politely. When she finished, I explained that the squirrels were not causing damage and that I was only putting out a small amount of food. She clearly did not like that answer. Over the next few weeks she continued bringing it up. Every time we crossed paths, she had something new to say. The squirrels were too comfortable. The squirrels were becoming dependent. The squirrels might damage gardens. The squirrels might attract more squirrels. It felt like she had made them her personal mission. Then one Saturday morning she appeared at my door carrying several printed pages. She claimed they contained information proving that feeding squirrels was irresponsible. I accepted the papers, thanked her, and closed the door. The stack went directly into a drawer. A few days later she reported me to the homeowners association. That complaint went nowhere because there were no rules against feeding wildlife responsibly. Then she started posting complaints in the community social media group. People mostly ignored her. A few residents even defended me. That seemed to make her even more frustrated. One evening I was sitting in my backyard watching the squirrels when an idea suddenly came to me. If Linda was going to spend so much time worrying about squirrels, maybe I should give everyone something truly interesting to look at. The idea started as a joke, but the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. I work as an architectural designer. Creating structures is literally what I do for a living, and if there is one thing designers enjoy, it is unusual projects. The next weekend I started sketching. Tiny buildings, tiny bridges, tiny pathways, tiny gathering areas. At first it was just for fun. Then the project slowly became real. I spent evenings designing miniature structures specifically sized for squirrels. Every detail received attention. Every building had a purpose. Every pathway connected naturally with the others. The goal was not simply to build a feeder. The goal was to create an entire miniature squirrel city. When the first section was finished, I installed it near the trees at the back of my property. The squirrels investigated almost immediately. Watching them explore the tiny structures was honestly hilarious. Within days, I added more pieces, then more, then even more. What started as one small structure slowly expanded into an entire miniature neighborhood. The funny part was that most neighbors loved it. People stopped during walks to look at it. Families brought their children. Visitors took photographs. Even residents who never cared about squirrels found it entertaining. Word started spreading beyond the neighborhood. And the more popular the Squirrel City became, the more irritated Linda seemed to get. One afternoon, I looked across the street and saw her staring at the miniature buildings with an expression that suggested she was already planning her next complaint. At that moment, I had a feeling the Squirrel City was about to become a much bigger issue than a handful of peanuts in the backyard. As the Squirrel City continued growing, more people started stopping by to see it. What surprised me most was how quickly it became a conversation piece throughout the neighborhood. Children loved watching the squirrels run across tiny bridges and climb miniature buildings. Parents took pictures. Even people who normally rushed through evening walks would stop for a few minutes to see what the squirrels were doing. Linda was not one of those people. The more attention the Squirrel City received, the more frustrated she seemed to become. A few weeks later, she filed another complaint with the Homeowners Association. This time, she claimed the miniature structures were attracting too many squirrels and creating a neighborhood problem. The HOA investigated. After reviewing everything, they informed her that the structures were entirely on my property, followed community rules, and were not causing any damage or safety concerns. Once again, her complaint went nowhere. That should have been the end of the story. Instead, it made the Squirrel City even more popular. People became curious about what had caused so much drama. Neighbors who had never visited before started coming by to see it for themselves. Some even brought small squirrel-safe treats to contribute. Then something unexpected happened. A local community magazine featured the Squirrel City in an article about creative backyard projects. The photos turned out great. The article spread online. Within days, people from nearby towns were visiting just to see the tiny buildings. The attention was far beyond anything I had imagined when I first sketched the idea on a piece of paper. Meanwhile, Linda was becoming increasingly isolated in her campaign against the squirrels. Every complaint seemed to produce the opposite result. The more she objected, the more people supported the project. One afternoon during a neighborhood event, several residents approached me and suggested adding new sections to the city. One person recommended a miniature town hall. Another suggested a tiny park. Someone else wanted a squirrel train station. The ideas were endless. I ended up adding several new features over the following months. The city became larger, more detailed, and far more entertaining. At that point, even some people who originally thought the project was silly admitted it had become something special. The Squirrel City was not just about squirrels anymore. It had become a fun community attraction. Then came the moment that finally ended the conflict. During an HOA meeting, Linda once again raised the issue and demanded action. Before the board could respond, several residents stood up and spoke. They talked about how much joy the project brought to the neighborhood. They talked about families visiting together. They talked about how rare it was to have something that genuinely made people smile. One after another, neighbors defended the Squirrel City. By the time they finished, the board had heard more positive comments than complaints. The HOA officially closed the matter and confirmed there were no violations. That decision ended the debate for good. Over time, Linda stopped bringing it up. The Squirrel City remained exactly where it was. Today, it is still one of the most talked about features in the neighborhood. The squirrels continue exploring their tiny buildings. Visitors still stop to take photos. Children still laugh when they see squirrels running through miniature streets. And every time I look at it, I remember how the entire project started with a complaint that never should have existed in the first place. The funny lesson is that sometimes people become so focused on stopping harmless things that they accidentally make them even bigger. If Linda had simply ignored a few squirrels, none of this would have happened. Instead, her complaints inspired an entire Squirrel City that ended up becoming one of the most popular things in the neighborhood. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments what building you would add to the Squirrel City. And do not forget to share this video and subscribe to Karen Stories Daily for more Karen encounters, neighborhood drama, and unbelievable real-life stories. Sometimes the smallest complaints create the biggest surprises.